What has happened to me through having this opinion and speaking out the way I do, it's destroyed my life, it's destroyed my wife's life, it's destroyed my mother's life. I live with constant death threats. I've got some of them here if you want to read when we talk about a two-tier policing system. I have to wear a bulletproof vest. I've got people wanting to murder me and massacre me.
Well, then stop being a racist and a bigot.
Racist? Can you please explain one thing I've ever said?
I am a British citizen. I was born in this country, and I do not spout off rubbish like you do. Okay?
No, what am I saying that's rubbish?
I haven't got death threats. Do you know why? It's because I'm a nice person.
Please explain. If you talk against Islam, you'll have death threats.
In this culture, it's even more taboo, because once you bring shame to your family, that's it. You know, the consequences are you could be killed.
Something historic is happening right now in Britain, and it is bigger than any party, bigger than any policy, bigger even than Number 10 itself. Donald Trump has just unleashed his most devastating attack yet on Prime Minister Kier Starmer, and the shockwaves are tearing through the political system. But this time, it is not Trump alone. In an unprecedented twist, King Charles has stepped out of the shadows, his words striking like thunder, aligning him with Trump's furious warning. What was once dismissed as political noise has now turned into a national emergency, leaving Starmer cornered, weakened, and running out of allies. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will reveal why the British establishment is trembling, why Parliament is in turmoil, and why even the monarchy is no longer silent. 3 nights ago, the world watched as Donald Trump stood before a roaring crowd in Ohio, but the target of his fire was not Joe Biden, not Kamala Harris, not even the American deep state. It was Britain's own Prime Minister, Kier Starmer. In words as sharp as blades, Trump accused Starmer of betraying his own people, pouring billions into housing illegal migrants in luxury hotels, while war veterans, men and women who bled for their country, sleep on the cold pavements of London. The audience gasped, not because the accusation was new, but because Trump spoke without hesitation, without the polished phrases of diplomacy. He called Starmer a disgrace to the British flag, and the statement exploded across both American and British media. At first, Downing Street tried to downplay it. Advisers told journalists that Trump was only speaking for himself, that his words had no official weight. But within hours, the White House issued a statement confirming that Washington supported Trump's criticism. The State Department echoed the warning, hinting at economic consequences. If Britain dared to extend its Online Safety Act into American platforms, suddenly this was no longer just a Trump outburst. This was the United States government standing shoulder to shoulder with its former president against the sitting Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Inside Westminster, panic spread quickly. Labour MPs were caught off guard, scrambling to explain why £1.2 billion of taxpayer money was being quietly funneled into 4-star hotels for migrants. Leaked documents, detailed spa treatments, endless buffets and ocean view suites, all while decorated veterans like Sergeant David Miller, who lost his leg in Helmand Province, are reduced to begging on the streets. The moral outrage was immediate and unforgiving. Even Starmer's most loyal supporters struggled to defend it. And then came the moment no one expected. At a charity gala for veterans in London, King Charles delivered a speech that will go down in history. Looking directly into the cameras, his voice steady but heavy with conviction, the king declared, "Those who have served with courage deserve our gratitude, our honour, and above all, our care before all others." It was a sentence carefully chosen, but it landed like a sledgehammer. For decades, the British monarchs have remained neutral, never interfering directly in politics. Yet here was King Charles aligning himself with the very argument Donald Trump had made just hours earlier. The reaction was immediate. Hashtags linking Trump and the King began trending worldwide. Videos of veterans sleeping in cardboard boxes played side by side with shots of migrant hotels offering champagne breakfasts. Petitions demanding immediate action for veterans gained hundreds of thousands of signatures in less than 24 hours. Protests ignited outside of Parliament, banners reading "Veterans First" and "Starmer." Betrayed Britain filling the streets. The monarchy had spoken, the world was watching, and Kier Starmer found himself in the most dangerous position of his political career. Downing Street went into full crisis mode. Senior ministers were summoned in the middle of the night. Advisers crafted frantic talking points. Yet every word Starmer spoke seemed weak, defensive, and out of touch. When he tried to argue that the migrant policy was about compassion, the public roared back with fury. What about compassion for our soldiers? What about compassion for those who risked their lives for Britain? His answers fell flat, his credibility shattered. And now the crisis is no longer just political. It is existential. For the first time in living memory, a British monarch and an American president, past and present, have united in public opposition to a sitting prime minister. The moral weight of that alliance is crushing, and the walls of number 10 are trembling. The question echoing across Britain tonight is chilling. Can Kier Starmer survive this storm? Or is his government already doomed? As the sun rose over Westminster the following morning, Britain was already a nation on edge. Newspapers splashed with front-page headlines screaming of betrayal, humiliation and chaos. Trump slams Starmer. King breaks silence. Veterans betrayed. The message was everywhere, and the damage was unstoppable. For Starmer, the nightmare had only just begun. His cabinet ministers arrived at Downing Street with hollow eyes, knowing that the Prime Minister they once rallied behind was now standing alone against a tidal wave of fury that spanned from Washington to Buckingham Palace. Inside the corridors of power, tension reached boiling point. Senior Labour figures argued furiously about how to contain the crisis. Some demanded an immediate policy reversal, calling for emergency legislation to redirect migrant housing funds to veterans. Others warned that retreating now would look like weakness and hand Trump and King Charles a decisive victory. Starmer, caught in the middle, sat silent, his notes trembling in his hand. For the first time since entering office, his authority no longer commanded respect. His ministers were not looking at him as a leader. They were looking at him as a liability. Meanwhile, outside the halls of government, the people of Britain were making their voices heard in a way that could no longer be ignored. In Manchester, veterans groups marched through the streets carrying placards reading, "Homes for heroes, not migrants." In Birmingham, families of fallen soldiers joined hands with protesters, chanting for immediate reform. In London, Westminster Bridge was flooded with banners comparing Starmer to a traitor, while chants of Veterans First echoed through the city. What began as scattered outrage had transformed into a national uprising. The images spread online like wildfire. Viral videos showed elderly veterans sleeping under thin blankets in the rain, juxtaposed with footage of young migrants enjoying heated hotel swimming pools. Clips of King Charles's speech, replayed millions of times, became a rallying cry for those who felt abandoned by the government. Trump's words, once seen as distant noise from across the Atlantic, now sounded prophetic. The narrative was set. Starmer had betrayed Britain, and the evidence was playing out in real time. But the most devastating blow came not from the streets, but from within his own party. Backbench Labour MPs, terrified of losing their seats, began to break ranks. Anonymous leaks revealed furious messages in internal chats, calling the Prime Minister out of touch and morally bankrupt. Some even whispered about replacing him before the next election to salvage what remained of the party's reputation. For a leader who had prided himself on control and discipline, this rebellion was nothing short of catastrophic. And just when Starmer thought it couldn't get worse, Donald Trump returned to the stage with his most chilling warning yet. In a fiery televised interview, he declared that if Britain insisted on enforcing its Online Safety Act against American companies, it would face severe economic retaliation. "We don't take orders from failing governments," Trump thundered, "and we will not allow free speech to be strangled by a Prime Minister who can't even take care of his own veterans." His words carried not just anger, but a promise of consequences. Analysts on both sides of the Atlantic quickly agreed. If America acted, Britain's fragile post-Brexit economy would shatter under the pressure. In this moment, Starmer was no longer just facing protest or political embarrassment. He was staring down the possibility of economic collapse, diplomatic isolation, and a monarchy that had turned against him. For the first time in living memory, the Prime Minister of Britain stood on the edge of a legitimacy crisis so profound that even his survival as leader was now in doubt. And as the hours passed, the fury only grew. Television stations replayed images of King Charles shaking hands with wounded veterans, contrasted with Starmer's blank expressions in Parliament. Social media platforms overflowed with the hashtag Starmer must go. Petitions demanding an immediate general election crossed 500,000 signatures within 2 days. Britain was no longer debating policy. Britain was demanding change. Behind the black gates of Downing Street, the question was no longer whether the scandal would pass, but whether the government could survive another week. And as one senior aide confided to a reporter, we're not just fighting Trump or the King anymore, we're fighting our own people. The storm that began with Trump's fiery words had now evolved into a full-scale political earthquake. Shaking the foundations of Westminster, Starmer, once hailed as the man who would stabilise Britain after years of division, was now portrayed as the very embodiment of betrayal, arrogance and weakness. His authority was not just questioned, it was collapsing before the eyes of the nation. Parliament, normally a place of sharp words but controlled order, had descended into chaos. During Prime Minister's questions, the opposition benches roared with fury, demanding answers that Starmer could no longer provide. When Conservative MP Sarah Henderson held up a photograph of a homeless veteran named James Patterson, a Royal Marine who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, the chamber fell into stunned silence. Why is this man sleeping on the streets while illegal migrants enjoy luxury hotels on the taxpayers' dime, she thundered. Starmer stuttered, shuffled his notes and tried to read a pre-written defence. But the damage was done. The image of a broken soldier clashed too violently with Starmer's robotic words. For many MPs watching, it was the moment the Prime Minister's credibility disintegrated. Inside his own party, rebellion brewed. Openly, junior ministers began resigning in protest, stating they could no longer defend a government that placed outsiders above its own heroes. Backbench MPs went further, calling for a leadership challenge. For the first time in years, Labour voters themselves began to turn on the party they had once trusted. In working-class strongholds, local councils were bombarded with furious letters, veterans groups staged sit-ins, and lifelong Labour families whispered the unthinkable. Perhaps it was time to abandon Starmer altogether. And then came the most shocking turn of all. Buckingham Palace insiders leaked that King Charles was not finished. The monarch, deeply disturbed by what he called the moral collapse of the government, had begun hosting private meetings with veterans' charities, urging immediate solutions. Rumours swirled that he had even spoken directly with world leaders about his concerns, bypassing Downing Street in an extraordinary breach of tradition. For centuries, the British monarchy had remained above politics, careful never to interfere in the running of government. But now, King Charles was making his disapproval unmistakably clear. The impact was electric. Protesters outside Parliament carried signs with Charles's words written in bold. Care before all others. Viral montages showed Trump's fiery speeches cut side by side with the King's calm but devastating rebuke. Across Europe and America, headlines spoke of an unholy alliance, a foreign president and a British monarch, united in their condemnation of Starmer. Diplomats whispered that Britain was drifting toward a constitutional storm not seen since the abdication crisis of 1936. The question was no longer whether Starmer's policies would survive, but whether his government itself could stand against a monarch who had turned against him. Meanwhile, Reform UK seized the moment. Nigel Farage launched a nationwide Veterans First campaign, promising to end migrant hotel spending overnight and redirect every penny toward housing for those who had served. His rallies drew thousands, his speeches went viral, and his party surged in the polls, climbing 8 points in less than a week. For the first time in years, Labour's dominance looked fragile and Farage smelled blood in the water. But the crisis reached its most dangerous moment when whispers began to spread that Parliament itself might not survive the chaos. Senior Tory MPs, emboldened by the public outrage, began demanding an immediate general election. Leaked documents reveal that even some Labour ministers believed dissolving Parliament might be the only way to restore legitimacy, and lurking in the background was the King, the one man in Britain with the ancient authority to dissolve Parliament in times of national emergency. Could it really happen? Could King Charles, pushed to the edge by a scandal too great to ignore, call for the dissolution of Parliament and force Starmer to face the people? That question hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet unavoidable. Britain had entered uncharted waters, and the fate of its government now rested not in the hands of the Prime Minister, but in the combined weight of a furious public, a defiant American president, and a monarch unwilling to stay silent any longer. For Kier Starmer, the nightmare was complete. His party fractured, his people enraged, his monarchy against him, and his allies abroad turning cold. Every step he took seemed to tighten the noose around his government, and as the nation braced for what might come next, one truth was undeniable. Britain was no longer simply facing a scandal, it was facing a historic reckoning. The walls of Downing Street rattled with the sound of rebellion, and across the nation the fury had reached boiling point. What began as a scandal over hotels had spiralled into a full-scale legitimacy crisis, and the Prime Minister found himself trapped in a storm he could not control. The protests had grown larger, louder and more relentless. In London, tens of thousands marched to Parliament Square, their chants echoing through the capital. Veterans first, Starmer out and care before all others. Banners of King Charles and Donald Trump, once unimaginable side by side, now waved above the crowds like symbols of defiance. The image was shocking. A foreign president and a British monarch, united in spirit if not in word, standing as guardians of principles that Starmer was accused of abandoning. Inside Westminster, the atmosphere was poisonous. Cabinet meetings turned into shouting matches, with ministers accusing each other of betrayal and cowardice. Whispers of resignation filled the corridors, and every day brought new leaks to the press, exposing just how broken the government had become. In hushed conversations, senior Labour figures discussed contingency plans, a leadership challenge, a policy reversal, or even the nuclear option, forcing Starmer out before he dragged the entire party into ruin. But the most devastating pressure came from the palace. Courtiers let it slip that King Charles was deeply disturbed by the government's failure to act, and his private meetings with veterans groups were now making their way into headlines. Insiders whispered that the king, though bound by constitutional restraint, was considering his most powerful tool, the ancient prerogative to dissolve Parliament if a government had lost the confidence of its people. For decades, such a move had been unthinkable, a relic of history. But now, with Britain in uproar, with veterans abandoned and protesters filling the streets, the unthinkable no longer seemed impossible. And then came the breaking point. During a heated parliamentary session, Starmer faced wave after wave of attacks. When a Conservative member of Parliament demanded he step aside for the good of the nation, the chamber erupted in cheers. Labour MPs, once his loyal defenders, sat in silence. Some even joined the applause. Cameras captured the look on Starmer's face, pale, drained, cornered. It was the image of a leader who knew the fight was slipping from his hands. Outside the chamber, Nigel Farage delivered a speech that electrified the nation. Standing before a sea of veterans and their families, he thundered, "We will not be silent while our heroes sleep in the cold and our government funds the comfort of strangers. We will fight and we will win because Britain belongs to its people first." His words ignited the crowd, and within hours, Reform UK surged yet again in the polls. Starmer was not only losing his grip on government, he was losing the country itself. Internationally, the humiliation deepened. American networks ran endless coverage of Trump's final warning, framing Britain as a nation on the brink. European newspapers asked whether Britain had lost its way. Even Australia and Canada, once silent allies, expressed concern about Britain's direction. In the eyes of the world, the United Kingdom, once a symbol of stability, now looked like a nation adrift, led by a Prime Minister drowning in scandal and stripped of moral authority. And in the middle of it all, King Charles prepared for his next move. His words at the Veterans Gala still echoed across the nation, care before all others. They were more than a phrase. They were a line in the sand. If the government would not act, the people would demand it, and if Parliament refused to listen, the king himself might be forced to intervene. As the crisis deepened, one truth became undeniable. This was no longer politics as usual. This was a reckoning. Trump's thunderous warning, Charles's quiet but devastating rebuke, and the fury of a betrayed people had combined into a storm unlike any in modern British history. The survival of Kier Starmer's government was now hanging by a thread, and that thread was fraying fast. Britain stood at the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown. Would the king dissolve Parliament? Would a general election be forced upon the nation? Would Starmer cling to power? Or would history remember him as the Prime Minister who lost the trust of his people, his monarchy and his allies abroad? The answers had not yet come, but one thing was certain: Britain would never be the same again. Thank you.